Hello, and welcome to Ask a Historian, brought to you by Heritage Mississauga. I'm Matthew Wilkinson, your host and historian with Heritage Mississauga. Together, we'll dive into the fascinating stories that shape Mississauga together. Remember, you can send your questions to history@heritagemississauga.org and help us explore more local history. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow us and stay connected with Heritage Mississauga's programs and events. On today's episode of Ask a Historian, we will be sharing three fascinating stories from local history, thanks to recent inquiries that we've received here at Heritage Mississauga. Our first question comes from Dorothy, and it is, what is the story of Crumbie Street in Streetsville? Many people will be hard-pressed to find Crumbie Street. It's a very short little street that runs off of near Tannery and Broadway. It is so short, in fact, there's only one road sign and one municipal address on Crumbie Street, but the street itself has a fascinating history, I should say, fascinating origin to its name. So Crumbie Street in Streetsville is a short, truncated stub of a road, physically speaking. So short, in fact, like I said, it only has one road address on the street. Many may even confuse the street with a laneway or an access point that leads into a parking lot at Center Plaza. But near the intersection of Tannery Street and Broadway, you can find a roadside proclaiming Crumbie Street, and that is spelled Crumbie, Crumbie Street. Sometimes the name Crumbie is spelled alternatively as Crombie with an O instead of a U, but Crumbie is the name that is recorded most commonly in local history. The street is named for a local doctor, Dr. John Crumbie, who lived between 1794 and 1877. He was born in Stonykirk, Scotland. He received his early education and taught in the parish school in his home community in Scotland. In 1819, he immigrated to Canada along with his family. His father settled in Shinkuzi, a little bit north of us. And in 1827, John graduated from medical school in Fairfield, New York. And in 1829, he was back in Canada and he established his own medical practice in Streetsville, becoming only the second licensed doctor in Peel County behind Dr. Joseph Adamson. He became a familiar figure on horseback as he visited the sick and needy, and his circuit was approximately 50 square miles around Streetsville. Many of Dr. Crombie's patients were poor, and it is recorded that he did not charge for his services if a person could not afford to pay. And he always carried extra provisions, such as clothing or food, for those who needed it. In time, he became lovingly referred to as the Old Doctor, and he served his community faithfully right up until his passing, even as his eyesight failed. He had a substantial brick house built along the banks of the Mullet Creek, and Crumbie Street today recalls the entrance to his large property, which also fronted onto Queen Street, which is what is largely made up of Center Plaza today. The house is no longer there, of course. Dr. Crumbie was described as frank, cheerful, and honest. He had a moral fearlessness and was a highly respected citizen. He had a keen interest in education, and for many years he was one of the county examiners, using his considerable influences to improve schools. During Dr. Crumbie's time, several epidemics swept through historic Mississauga, notably malaria in 1830, smallpox in 1831, cholera between 1846 and 53, and again from 1865 to 68, and perhaps the most challenging locally was diphtheria in 1853-54 and again in 1860. These epidemics would have challenged the doctor's skills and available medical knowledge in an era before accepted vaccines. Cholera and diphtheria, viewed at the time as diseases of the blood, were often treated with combinations of calomel, opium, and bloodletting. However, links began to be established between diseases and sanitation and clean water. Local medical boards were established and sanitary measures passed, and doctors began to rally together to fight epidemics. And Dr. Crombie was a particular advocate against the sale of tainted food for adequate household sanitation. Historically, many medical advances, such as the understanding of the transmission of diseases and the use of vaccines, developed as doctors sought to remedy the sick during epidemics. Dr. Crombie's property, as I mentioned, was where Center Plaza in Streetsville now stands, and the road that carries his name today was once a laneway into his home. Dr. Crombie is buried in the historic Streetsville Memorial Cemetery on Queen Street. Our second question today comes from Jessica, and she is wondering who the famous poet from Meadowvale was, and did he write an anthem? Jessica, indeed, it's a kind of a forgotten piece of local history. You will find Andrew Henry Crozier buried in Trinity Anglican Cemetery up in the north end of Streetsville. Um, Andrew Henry Crozier, who lived between 1859 and 1941 and was born and raised in the Meadowvale area. He actually lived at a crossroads hamlet just a little bit to the north of Streetsville, which was known as Harris's Corners or Crozier's Corners at times. In 1901, Andrew Henry Crozier, who was a poet and a renowned public speaker at the time, wrote and composed what he called a new national anthem for the British Empire. Music accompaniment was written by the renowned composer Henry Herbert Godfrey in Toronto, himself the author of several patriotic Canadian songs prior to 1900. In 1902, Godfrey produced an album called Canadian Patriotic Songs and Melodies, and this featured some of Andrew Crozier's work. Andrew Crozier seemingly knew exactly who to connect with for putting his poetry to music. Andrew may have conceived of the idea of a new anthem following the death of Queen Victoria in January of 1901 and the ascension to the English throne by King Edward VII. Crozier even received royal permission to use portraits of King Edward VII and Queen Alexandra accompanying the music sheets, which were available for purchase and announced in the Brampton Conservator on August 9th of 1901. As noted in the Conservator newspaper, it is intended that the new anthem shall supersede the old one and become the recognized national anthem of the whole British Empire. Yes, you read that right. A relatively unknown poet and speaker from Meadowvale here in historic Mississauga and composed what was to be a new national anthem for the whole British Empire. But who was Andrew Crozier? That's basically your question, I think. The Crozier family originated from Drawmore, County Tyrone, Ireland, and Andrew's parents, John and Mary Jane Crozier, came to Canada with their children in 1869, first settling near Milton. In 1885, John purchased the former Birdsall Harris Manor Farm at the southeast corner of what it was then Derry Road and Mississauga Road on Lot 10, Concession 4. This intersection no longer exists, as Derry Road was rerouted slightly north of its original route. The Crozier family grew to include 8 children: Isabella, Mary, Anne, John James, Andrew Henry, William Thomas, Margaret, Sarah Jane, and Rebecca, all of whom were born in Ireland. Before the arrival of the Crozier family in 1885, the crossroads had become referred to as Harris's Corners, after William Ginger Harris, of the well-known Grand Hotel. After the Croziers began acquiring property here, the crossroads became locally referred to as Crozier's Corners. In 1908, Andrew inherited the home farm from his father at the southeast corner. His brother William Thomas Crozier owned the farm on the southwest corner, and another brother, John James Crozier, owned the farm on the northwest corner. So 3 of the 4 corners were owned by or populated by farms owned by the Crozier family. Additionally, John James' brother-in-law, Edgar Shields, owned the farm on the other corner. Crozier's Corners very much indeed. In 1928, Andrew granted his property to his brother John James, although Andrew continued to live on the property. Andrew remained close with his brother John James and his wife Jenny. Jenny handled Andrew's affairs when he passed away in 1941. Andrew, whose primary occupation was listed as farmer, wrote poetry frequently for the British periodical publication Truth. He also contributed poetry to the Daily World and the Streetsville Review Herald. Andrew was a member of the Meadowvale Literary Society and Debating Club, and the society produced its own newspaper called the Meadowvale Mirror for a short time in the early 1900s. Andrew is also mentioned as being acquainted with John Craig Eaton, the second president of the Timothy Eaton Company, and close friends with Harry Spear, a noted artist and publisher. It was Spear's Review Herald publishing house in Streetsville that published Andrew's new anthem. Despite some of the well-known people that Andrew was connected with, relatively little is known about Andrew himself, and few examples of any of his work have actually been located. Unmarried, Andrew passed away in Streetsville in 1941 at the age of 84, and as I mentioned earlier, was laid to rest alongside his parents at Trinity Anglican Cemetery in Streetsville. As for Andrew's new national anthem for the British Empire, it is unclear how popular it became despite having royal endorsement. But it was published and it was a going concern for at least a very short period of time. Again, the new national anthem for the British Empire, written and published by Andrew Henry Crozier in 1901. Our third question today comes from Elizabeth, and she is asking maybe for her namesake, but who was Elizabeth Hoople of Streetsville, a noted author and citizen in Streetsville. It is a little bit of an interesting story and that relatively unknown, but Elizabeth Hoople, or E.L. Hoople, as she stylized herself as an author, wrote a book called Medicine Maid: The Life Story of a Canadian Pioneer. Um, I recall the conversation I had many years ago with Mac Byard of the Streetsville Historical Society, both about the book and the author. I'd meant to read the book way back when, but it had been many years since I had gotten around to it. But I did start to read it, and although it had languished on my shelf for a while, but it turns out a very fascinating read, considering again that the author is someone who lived locally, despite the subject of the book is a little bit farther afield. Um, I was I am interested in learning more about the author. She was relatively well known in Streetsville, and so having received your inquiry, Elizabeth, gave us a chance to explore a little bit more of a biography of the author beyond the book itself. We did have a few tidbits in our records, but not a great deal. And in the process, I reached out some time ago to the Region Appeal Archives and the Streetsville Historical Society, and in that process, a fascinating window in the life and times of Elizabeth Hoople really did open up. Special thanks to Anne and Mac Byard of the Streetsville Historical Society and to Nick Moreau at the Region Appeal Archives for sharing some wonderful resources and material. Elizabeth Hoople was born in Brooklyn, New York in 1903, the daughter of Dr. Heber Nelson Hoople and Carrie Munson. She had a brother, Rolf, who passed away in 1928. While born in New York, the Hoople family had strong connections to Northumberland County, Stormont County, and the Cornwall area of Ontario. Elizabeth came to live with relatives in Toronto, where she pursued her education at the Bishop Strachan School and the University of Toronto, also the Ontario College of Art and the Ontario College of Education. Elizabeth moved to Streetsville in 1931 or 1932, where she taught English, French, and art at Streetsville High School. In 1931, she also founded the first Streetsville Girl Guide Company with the assistance of Emma Moss and Mary Crozier. Elizabeth was also instrumental in establishing the Girl Guide companies both in Arundel and Cooksville. So, very active community member and community volunteer. During the Second World War, Elizabeth worked at the Massey Harris Airplane Factory in Weston, where wings for the de Havilland Mosquito combat aircraft were manufactured. After the war years, Elizabeth remained active in the Streetsville community. She was an avid painter and gardener, a beloved supply teacher, a teacher of English as a second language, and a longtime member of Trinity Anglican Church in Streetsville. Elizabeth was also a member of the Streetsville Historical Society and was involved with the Streetsville Women's Institute. She served as the president of the Women's Institute and of the South Peel Women's Institute for a time. For her considerable efforts in her community, Elizabeth received Citizen of the Year award from the Streetsville Lions Club in 1969. Elizabeth authored two books, The Hooples of Hooples Creek in 1967 and the aforementioned Medicine Maid in 1977. Both are family histories. The first is the history of the Hoople family. Their ancestral lands were submerged beneath the St. Lawrence River and connect in part to the story of the lost villages of the St. Lawrence Seaway and Upper Canada Village. The second book is based in part on the stories of Elizabeth's great-great-grandmother, Mary Whitmore, and the family's experiences during the American Revolutionary War. Elizabeth Hoople lived in Streetsville until 1984, and she passed away in 1988. Her obituary remembered her as a warm-hearted lady, independent in thought and forthright in speech, who gave so generously of her time and her talents. What a wonderful tribute. Elizabeth was laid to rest in the Park Lawn Cemetery in Toronto alongside her mother and brother. She truly is someone, reflecting on what I've learned of her and the book she's written and the life and time she spent in Streetsville, she's truly someone I wish I had an opportunity to meet and speak to myself. A mantel clock, once owned by Elizabeth, sits on the mantel today in the Leslie Home, which is the home of the Streetsville Historical Society. The Streetsville Historical Society also has her typewriter and other information and images from her life in Streetsville in their collections. So with that, I just want to say thank you for spending your time with us here on Ask a Historian. Like, subscribe, and follow us, and stay connected for updates on new episodes. And join us next time on Ask a Historian for more stories of the fascinating history of the city of Mississauga. Thank you, and we'll see you again.